Welcome to this week's edition of the Animal News Recap, starring yours truly, Happy Veg. This week, I've got two pretty big topics to kind of dive into, so let's just jump right into the first one. This was a pretty big story. I don't know if you guys read about it. Rosa King, she was a zookeeper at the Hamerton Zoo in the UK. This past week, she was mauled by a tiger. A tiger had gotten into the area that she was working and obviously attacked her. Luckily, there wasn't much of a panic. People were escorted away and off the property, as far away from that incident, obviously, as possible. There wasn't much panic. So nobody had to see anything. Children and adults alike, they were ushered out before they had witnessed anything. Although, there was a report, I guess zookeepers were frantically throwing meat into the enclosure in an attempt to distract or lure the animal away from her, but obviously their attempts did not succeed. So we have to look at, first of all, that this is not the first highly publicized incident involving someone being attacked or getting into an animal enclosure as of late. There was the Harambe the gorilla, the little boy who got into his enclosure, number one. Number two, there was obviously this incident, the tiger. And number three, there was the guy who jumped into the lion's enclosure trying to commit suicide, which, this is three big events involving three pretty dangerous animals. So let me go into my personal experience with the zoo and a couple years ago, I went to Toronto with a friend, and we were doing a weekend stay. And we had intentions of going to the Ripley's Aquarium and the Toronto Zoo. Up until that day, I had always kind of looked at the zoo as an educational experience. However, after my visit, I kind of had a different feeling about what I saw. A lot of the animals that I saw were sleeping. They were in the corner. They were just not doing things that I would have deemed to be characteristic of the animal itself. I didn't see, it shattered my expectations as far as seeing animals running around and perhaps playing with one another. The educational aspect kind of was lost on me at that point, and I started to think to myself, you have to look at necessity. Now, we read about, most recently the panda babies at the Toronto Zoo. You look at conservation, and that's one of the perks of the zoo is, they do work towards repopulating, species that are on the verge of extinction. And so there is some positive, but the negative aspect is obviously that all of those animals don't belong in a caged area. And like I said, after my visit, I kind of left with a sour taste, kind of thinking did I really feel educated, or did I see animals that looked like they belonged in the wild? So addressing the security, one thing I did not see were zookeepers or staff in every area that I remember. I did not see enough staff, I should say. I saw them in the places where it mattered as far as I was concerned, but I didn't see them everywhere. And when you look at the fact that in three separate instances at three separate zoos, somebody was able to get into an enclosure, this kind of shines a light on perhaps safety not really being the primary concern when it really should be. So, first of all, I think it's important to address having security or staff at every enclosure. Any enclosure, first of all, that has any kind of an opening or an entry door, there should always be somebody who's monitoring, keeping tabs on every single person, children, adults, making sure nobody's, you can see somebody scaling a cage if you're standing there. You can see somebody attempting to open a door they shouldn't be opening if you're monitoring. So definitely that needs to be addressed. In every zoo, any single enclosure that has an opening or an entry, they should be being monitored, first of all. Second of all, let's check out these entries. How did people get in? How is our safety and security, is it high enough? Should, if there's an availability to fall into an enclosure, the fence should be higher. Very simple. If there's a door that can be opened, if, an employee forgets to lock it and somebody's able to get in there, that needs to be guarded. So obviously we have to, obviously there's got to be certain standards like mandated so that they can operate. So certain like security measures, like it has to be X amount of feet from here, or the door has to be locked at all times, things like that. Like there's certain precautionary measures that probably are taken, but clearly this demonstrates that they're not good enough. And, animals, particularly the gorilla, it was killed because of this. So not only did it live in captivity, but it was killed for something that really is the zoo's fault itself. People were blaming the parents and saying that they should have noticed, but when you really think about it, like, there shouldn't be an option to get in to the enclosure. That should never be something that even could be a possibility. So time to, as a whole, collectively, time to analyze these situations, spend the extra money and hire a few more people to be monitoring these enclosures. If you're not going to address where the openings are, you need to have more people standing by and watching to make sure that these sorts of things don't keep happening, because at the end of the day, people are really turning their backs on any kind of industry that uses animals. And although the zoo does not force animals to perform necessarily like, let's say, the circus would, they're still caged and they still don't belong behind closed doors. So the more negative things that keep happening, the worse off this industry is going to be. So it's my suggestion that you amp up your security features and really consider the possibility that anything can happen. So monitor your enclosures a little more heavily, investigate and perhaps relocate entries so that there's no option of people getting in, or C, which is the most, like, not a possibility option ever, but close and work on conservation. Start putting that money toward, that funding towards, going out into the rainforest and conserving the rainforest, or repopulating and conservation of entire species. Like, if this sort of thing keeps happening, that is a major problem. And so people are going to start turning their backs if they don't feel safe, or they feel like animals are being abused and are not happy, or particularly, like I said, the safety. Like, if you don't feel safe doing something, you're not going to go. And especially when that's attached to the knowledge that these sorts of things have already happened, it really is a deterrent. So shout out to the zoo. Time to, take these incidences and make something good out of a bad situation and work on the security. Never again should any report of a child or a person getting into an enclosure and getting attacked by an animal, or an animal being killed because there should be no more of that. It's time to put an end to that and work on your security before more people and more animals get hurt over a situation that was probably very simple to address had you A, put enough people on, or B, relocated and more heavily guarded the access points, period. To the second story. This one's kind of more personal to me because it's very close to home as far as location-wise. Dr. Mahavir Ricky, veterinarian from St. Catharines, Ontario, has been charged with 16 counts of animal cruelty. 16. They failure to provide care to an animal and abuse, particularly. This is a veterinarian, somebody that is being paid to look after your pet. This is, to me, like, the biggest abuse of someone's trust that I can really think of. If you're, like, for me, my cat, if you were somebody, if you bringing your pet somewhere, you're already putting your faith in that person, that they're going to do everything in their power to take care of your pet. Whether it's like asking a dog walker to walk your dogs, or asking someone to house sit and watch your cats for the weekend, or in this case, a veterinarian. You are taking a chance by having somebody else take care of your pet, somebody that you trust. And when they abuse that trust, I think it's probably, I can't even imagine, probably one of the worst feelings in the world, especially as a pet owner. The worst part of this situation is when it comes to a veterinarian, their job is to take care of animals. Their own responsibility is to make sure that your pet is looked after. So when you hear about something like this, 16 incidences through through 2013, 16 times this happened, or certain charges were brought upon him throughout 2013. Okay, that means 16 different people had their pets abused at the hand of this veterinarian. So first of all, how often does somebody monitor a veterinarian's performance? That's like problem number one. Second of all, like reviews. How often are they reviewed on a like professional level? Somebody taking a tour of the veterinary hospital, somebody, reviewing the videotapes, because there were clips on the article of like what appeared to be a video camera that had recorded him doing something to a puppy. So how often are those tapes looked at, and who's in charge of looking at them? Because if you're leaving that up to the veterinarians or the staff, that's a big mistake, because they're probably all aware of what's going on. So who's monitoring them? Who's reviewing them? Who's, performing any kind of an investigation on quality standards and making sure that, doing 3 random cases and finding out, animals are being treated the way they're supposed to be under the, the veterinarian's job title and responsibility. Now, animal cruelty charges in Canada do not typically bring an appropriate sentence. They do not. You see fines. You see bans on owning animals. But this situation is a little bit different, because now we're talking about a veterinarian, somebody who's in a position to care for animals where it's their actual job. To plant a bug in their ear, if somebody ever watches this video that has anything to do with the legality of things and, lawmakers, hello. Animal charges in this case, when you're a veterinarian, I would, as a Canadian citizen, I would expect jail time. I would expect jail time for every count, because you're not just somebody who owns an animal, you're somebody who's paid to take care of an animal. So jail time, to me, is the only option. And you know what? Tack on some fines, tack on a, ban on ever being around animals again, tack on all those additional things, but there needs to be jail time, because if you can do this to 16 different animals over the period of a year, 16 times, you have no regard for A, your position, or B, the well-being of the, animals that you're tasked with looking over. So I hope at the end of the day that he loses his license, never practice, he can never practice again. That's like thing number one. Number two, he better get a jail sentence, and it shouldn't just be 3 months or 2 months. He needs to learn a lesson. He abused 16 animals, so he needs some time in jail. He needs some reflection time. 3, I also hope that this will shine a light on the industry, and hopefully there will be new standards set for how to monitor and investigate and do like even a monthly checkup, through those cameras. Review those cameras once a month, once every 3 months. Check out what's going on behind closed doors. Expose this stuff before it happens. And this could have possibly, that's an entire year that this was not monitored. So obviously the standards, as far as like, like if in a restaurant, they do a health inspection, right? They check all your fridges, make sure everything's working, the proper temperatures, your food's all code-dated. So in a veterinary establishment, what do they do to monitor? Because to me, clearly not enough. If over the course of 1 year, this many times this veterinarian abused animals. So shout out to whoever's in charge of that. Time to sit down and kind of evaluate some things, particularly this, this incident first of all, but the industry as a whole. What are the standards on hiring somebody? How often, again, should you be monitoring them? Because over the course of 1 year, he was not discovered for anything he was doing. It wasn't brought to light until several years later. So clearly there's a problem with the way that things are being done. And the important thing here is to try and figure out how to bounce back and how to restore people's faith. Because I can tell you, as somebody who owned a pet and will be looking to get several thousand more pets in the future, I need to know that the person that I'm going to has gone through a rigorous examination process to make sure that they're wholly committed to taking care of animals, that they have all their degrees and that they performed at the very best, and that there's no like criminal history or any kind of crazy like animal related problems. And finally, I would be monitoring once a month, once a year, even at the very least, because this was not discovered for years. So once a year you do a thorough investigation. Once every month you do a regular checkup of videotapes. You pop in to make sure that animals are being taken care of properly. This sort of thing is not only like a tarnish to other veterinarians who perhaps do everything by the books and care about animals, as you should in that position, but also to restore that faith. Because people, I would say, people in St. Catharines, people who had been going to him, the parents of the abused animals, this is going to shake up the way they feel about things, and this is going to deter people from wanting to bring their animals in when they're sick. And that's the last thing that is beneficial to the animals. So definitely time to address and trying to come up with a better monitoring process, making sure that standards are being set and met, making sure animals are the number one priority of everybody on that staff, and making sure that these sorts of incidences, if they are happening, they're nipped in the bud immediately, as opposed to being allowed to continue for an entire year, which is just ridiculous to think about. So definitely time to get that under control, because nobody wants to read a story about abused animals. That about wraps things up for this week. Make sure to visit the links below to check out the original stories, see where I got my info, leave your comments, like, subscribe, and don't forget, visit my blog, www.happyveggie.weebly.com, for everything vegetarian. See you guys next week.